The desert sun burned high over the New Mexico sky, stretching shadows long across the vast and empty plains. The land was dry and unforgiving, the kind of land that made men hard and women stronger. In this harsh country lived Samuel Hargrove, a humble rancher who owned little more than a weathered cabin, a handful of cattle, and an endless supply of grit. His neighbors, miles away, often whispered that Samuel lived too close to Apache territory, but he never paid them much mind. He believed that respect could bridge even the deepest divides. Little did he know, his belief would be tested in a way that would change his life forever. It was on a late afternoon when Samuel, while checking his herd near the canyon's edge, heard cries carried by the wind. At first he thought it was the shrill cry of a hawk, but as he listened closer he realized they were human voices, strained, desperate, calling for help. He urged his horse forward and followed the sound until he came upon a sight that froze him in place. Two Apache women, tall and strong, were trapped beneath the wreckage of a collapsed wagon. Their horses had scattered, and the jagged rocks around them showed signs of a sudden landslide. One of the sisters had blood trickling from her forehead. The other struggled fiercely against the weight of wood pinning her legs. Samuel knew what it meant to stumble upon Apaches in distress. Helping them could bring him honor in their eyes, or it could mean punishment if they misunderstood his intentions. Many ranchers would have turned their horses and fled, fearful of retribution. But Samuel's heart refused to leave them. He leapt from his horse, threw down his hat, and without a second thought, began to work at the broken wood. The sisters stared at him, wary and confused. But desperation outweighed suspicion. It took every ounce of his strength, sweat soaking his shirt and dust stinging his throat. But Samuel managed to free the sisters one by one. The taller of the two, with fierce dark eyes, clutched her sister's arm and whispered something in Apache. Samuel could not understand the words, but he could hear the gratitude in her tone. They were injured, weak, and in no condition to walk the long distance back to their people. Samuel faced a choice: leave them to fend for themselves or risk his life by bringing them to his cabin for shelter. He chose the latter. The ride back to his cabin was slow. Samuel helped the sisters onto his horse, walking beside them on foot through the dry sands. He offered water from his flask, tore strips from his shirt to bind wounds, and when the younger sister trembled in pain, he told her stories of cattle and storms, anything to distract her from the suffering. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fallen, and the stars lit the sky in a blanket of silver. Over the next 2 days, Samuel nursed the sisters back to health. He boiled herbs, dressed wounds, and shared what little food he had. Though the sisters spoke little English and Samuel spoke no Apache, they began to understand one another through gestures, small smiles, and the quiet bond of survival. Samuel saw in their eyes that they were not just anyone's daughters, but women of stature, respected among their people. Their height, their strength, and their presence all spoke of something greater. Still, Samuel treated them as he would anyone in need, never once expecting anything in return. On the third morning before the sun rose, Samuel was awakened by the thunder of hooves outside his cabin. He stepped outside cautiously, rifle in hand, only to see a group of Apache warriors surrounding his home. At their head rode a towering man, broad-shouldered and stern-eyed. His presence carried authority, and Samuel quickly realized who he was: the chief. Behind him, the two sisters, now stronger, stood proudly, speaking quickly in their native tongue. Samuel's heart pounded. He did not know if they were praising him or condemning him. The chief dismounted, his gaze sharp and unreadable. For a long moment, silence hung in the air like a blade. Samuel braced himself for the worst, half expecting the warriors to seize him for daring to touch Apache women. But then the chief did something Samuel never could have predicted. He laid his hand upon Samuel's shoulder, a gesture of honor, and spoke in broken English. "You saved my daughters. You saved the blood of my people. For this you are not enemy. You are brother." The words struck Samuel like a hammer to the chest. He realized then that the women he had rescued were not just sisters but the chief's daughters, royalty among their people. By saving them, he had altered the course of his own fate. What followed was even more astonishing. The chief announced that Samuel's cabin and land would now be under the protection of the Apache. No rancher in those parts had ever heard of such a thing. Where others lived in fear of raids or retaliation, Samuel now lived under a shield of honor. The Apache warriors promised safe passage for his cattle, water from their springs during the dry months, and a bond that few men ever earned. Yet the greatest gift came later in the quiet moments. Samuel often sat beneath the stars with the sisters, who began to teach him their words, their songs, and their ways. He listened, eager to learn, and in return he shared with them the skills of ranching, the care of cattle, the planting of simple crops. A bridge had been built where once there had been only suspicion and division. In time, neighboring ranchers came to Samuel, confused and even envious of his unlikely bond. Some mocked him, calling him a fool for trusting the Apache. But Samuel never wavered. He knew that kindness had opened a door no fear could ever close. And slowly, his story spread beyond the canyons and plains. People began to see that peace was not just a dream but a choice. Sometimes a hard one, but always a possible one. Years later, when Samuel was an old man, he often told the tale to younger ranchers who doubted the worth of compassion. He would look them in the eye and say, "I gave what I could to strangers, and in return I gained a family larger than I ever imagined." Respect can build more fences than any hammer and nails. And when you choose kindness, you never know how far the ripples will reach. The story of the humble rancher who saved two Apache sisters became a legend whispered in both ranch houses and around Apache fires. It was more than just a tale of rescue. It was a reminder that courage does not always lie in the gun you carry, but in the hand you extend to someone in need. And so Samuel's name lived on, not because he was the richest rancher, or the most powerful, but because he was the man who believed that even in the harshest desert, seeds of trust could take root and grow. In the end, Samuel's life was never defined by the size of his ranch or the cattle he owned, but by a single act of compassion on a dusty canyon floor. By choosing to help two strangers, he gained not only the trust of a people feared by many, but also the protection of their chief and the respect of generations to come. What began as a risk turned into a bond that no blade, no bullet, and no prejudice could ever break. The lesson of Samuel's story is simple yet timeless. True strength is not measured in force, but in the courage to do what is right when it would be easier to walk away. In saving the sisters, he built a bridge between worlds, proving that even in a land scarred by distrust, kindness can plant roots deeper than hatred. His legacy reminds us all that compassion can change destinies, and sometimes, One choice can echo louder than a lifetime of silence.